The Chair recognizes himself for the purpose of an opening statement. I wish this hearing were not necessary. Many children grow up wanting to become FBI agents, to catch bad guys and protect the American people. We don't enjoy finding compelling evidence that the FBI director had predetermined the outcome of the case months in advance. But that is, thus far, what we have found, and these are only small pieces of the larger puzzle. The more information we acquire, the more interviews we conduct, and the more sources we contact, the more we learn. It has unfortunately taken a great deal of effort to get our executive branch agencies to cooperate with our legitimate congressional oversight. But we have made substantial progress, and it is a credit to our investigative task force members and staff. For all those in this room who continue to disparage our investigation as mere conspiracy theory, and for all those who have chosen to ignore serious irregularities and potential crimes that we have uncovered, I say this: imagine if you were under investigation. In fact, for those who think we are wasting time in this committee, suppose all of this had been said about candidate Obama before he was elected, or even more topical, about Hillary Clinton while she was running in the same election. Would we be where we are today? The only honest answer is an absolute affirmative yes. Of course we would be here, because every single Democrat would be protesting bias and discrimination against their preferred candidates by an out-of-control FBI and DOJ. So please stop saying this doesn't matter and is only the product of conspiracy theory. Instead, the American people hope you will understand that this investigation goes to the very heart of our system of justice, one that is supposed to be fair and treat everyone equally under the law. Mr. Strzok and others inside the FBI and DOJ turned our system of justice on its head, and that's why we're here and why this matters. Yesterday, Chairman Gowdy and I received a letter from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle raising numerous objections about the nature of our investigation. These claims are largely spurious, and I have responded publicly to them before. However, these claims are also revealing. The final line of that letter states that our Democratic colleagues will, quote, undertake efforts to protect their rights, end quote. I implore my friends not to continue their efforts to undermine this investigation. And as for their rights, I submit that the rights that should concern us are the rights of the American people, namely to know the facts, to trust that their law enforcement agencies are operating fairly and justly, and to feel secure in the knowledge that no one is above the law. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I must say before I begin my formal statement that this country has a number of emergencies right now under the jurisdiction of this committee, which we're not spending any time or any attention to. The leading one, obviously, being the fact that 3,000 children were improperly taken away from their families, and the administration seems either unwilling or, out of total incompetence, unable to return the kids to their families, even under court order. We ought to be holding hearings about the intentions or the competence of the Department of Homeland Service, of the Department of Homeland Security on this question. Mr. Chairman, it's of more immediate concern than this hearing, certainly. At the outset of this Congress, when my Democratic colleagues and I asked you to hold hearings about the Russian government's campaign to undermine our last election, you said no, and you offered a variety of excuses. We could not look into President Trump's overt attempts to obstruct the early stages of the Russian investigation because, you said, quote, there are other committees that have jurisdiction over part of this, unquote. You were also reluctant to interfere with the special counsel, quote, until Mr. Mueller's investigation is complete, it is redundant for the House of Representatives to engage in fact-gathering on many of the same issues. You also insisted that the House Judiciary Committee would never intrude on an active criminal investigation, claiming, perhaps erroneously, that the majority never questioned the FBI about the Clinton investigation while that investigation was still ongoing. Mr. Chairman, this joint investigation is now so far afield from the original statements that it can be difficult to discern what we are investigating at all. You initially described this inquiry as, quote, an investigation regarding charging decisions in the investigation surrounding Secretary Clinton's email server in 2016, close quote. Just a few days ago, over the course of an 11-hour interview, Republicans asked Mr. Strzok more than 200 questions about the special counsel's investigation, more than 30 questions about Mr. Strzok's personal interactions with the special counsel, and 25 questions about the FBI's use of confidential human sources, to determine who at the Trump campaign might have been compromised by a foreign government. Are we no longer going to wait until Special Counsel Mueller concludes his work, Mr. Chairman? Or perhaps the rules of this joint investigation, such as they are, operate differently now that we are approaching the midterm elections and Special Counsel Mueller is closing in on the President's close associates. In the majority's view, it seems, our job is to ask questions about the internal workings of the Special Counsel's investigation and to demand documents that lay out his strategy, but not to make any attempt to understand how the Russian government influenced our last election or any effort to protect our next election from an attack by the Russian government, a key foreign adversary. In the majority's view, it is more important to quiz Mr. Strzok about the FBI's use of confidential human sources in some wild attempt to prove President Trump's baseless claim that a, quote, spy, unquote, was planted inside his campaign, than it is to learn about the impact of exposing the identity of these sources while they are still working undercover. My Republican colleagues appear to have revealed the identity of at least one such source already. In the majority's view, the text messages exchanged between Mr. Strzok and Lisa Page are a higher priority for us than President Trump's request that James Comey end the investigation into Michael Flynn, or his decision to fire Director Comey, quote, because of that Russia thing with Trump and Russia, unquote, that's a quote from the President, or his repeated attempts to fire Special Counsel Mueller directly. In the majority's view, we do not have time to conduct oversight on almost any national security issue, but we have hours on end to discuss Mr. Strzok's affair. Which brings me to my next point. I have come to expect that President Trump will tweet abhorrent things about decent people, but I hope I can expect better behavior from my colleagues. Mr. Strzok volunteered to be here today, just as he volunteered to appear 2 weeks ago for what turned out to be an 11-hour interview. You don't have to like him, but you have to treat him and any witness before this committee with respect. Questions like, do you love Lisa Page? And who did you vote for in the last election? Questions that presidents posed in his interview are not relevant to any aspect of our official business. I would say the same of the majority's treatment of Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein on June 29th, which was at best uncivil, and of the committee's treatment of Lisa Page, which has been unfair to say the least. Mr. Chairman, I agree with you that Ms. Page must eventually comply with a duly issued subpoena, but it is beneath your office to suggest, as you did this week, that her decision not to appear for deposition means, quote, she has something to hide. It is beneath our committee to call her pathetic, as Mr. DeSantis did. It has nothing to do with the swamp, as Mr. Jordan suggested. Can we not be decent to our witnesses, Mr. Chairman? Must Republicans descend to the President's level, even in his defense? I know that the majority wants a public fight with Mr. Strzok today. I expect that they will ask him questions about the special counsel's investigation that you know the FBI will not permit him to answer, as you did more than 200 times in our last meeting with Mr. Strzok, so that his decision not to answer in instructions by the FBI not to answer can be played out on cable news again and again. And I expect that Mr. Strzok walked into this room knowing that Republicans may soon call for him to be held in contempt for following the long-standing policy of the Department of Justice. FBI agents like Mr. Strzok should not comment on or even acknowledge the existence of an ongoing criminal investigation. A single decision to deviate from that protocol can cause lasting damage to our republic, as anyone who has read the Inspector General's report and his conclusions about Mr. Comey's deviations from that protocol must acknowledge. When we reach that impasse, Mr. Chairman, I hope you will think back to the statements you made about interference with the special counsel earlier this Congress and consider the consequences of our words and actions here today. The majority keeps telling us over and over again that there was bias in the Clinton investigation, bias in the Russian investigation, and that bias must never again affect an investigation at the Department of Justice. The rules that prevent Mr. Strzok from answering some of the questions today are designed to accomplish precisely that, to prevent Congress and the public from injecting bias in counsel, to prevent Congress and the public from injecting bias and politics into the special counsel's investigation or into any other investigation. When the special counsel's job is done, I'd invite all of us to join in examining his findings. Until then, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can treat our guests with common courtesy and leave the special counsel alone to do his job. I yield back.